Ah, look who finally woke up. Look who finally noticed the cameras. Look who finally felt the eyes burning holes through their reality. You magnificent paranoid genius, you were right all along. They've been watching you for months, cataloging your movements, decoding your patterns, trying to understand what makes you tick. But here's the plot twist that's about to shatter their entire operation. You knew. You've known since day one. Every move you made, every word you spoke, every silence you held. It was all choreographed for their viewing pleasure. And now they want a meeting because they've realized something terrifying. You let them watch. You wanted them to see. You've been directing the show from the beginning, and they were just unpaid extras in your masterpiece. The watchers became the watched. The hunters became the hunted, and the subject became the hunted, and the subject became the architect of their confusion. They thought they were studying a specimen. Instead, they were staring into a mirror that showed them exactly what they lacked: power, purpose, the ability to exist without constantly seeking validation from screens and systems. You became their obsession not because you were hiding something, but because you were hiding nothing. But because you were hiding nothing. Let's rewind this twisted tape, shall we? 6 months ago, you started noticing the patterns. The same car parked 3 blocks away. The new neighbor who worked odd hours. The suddenly friendly co-worker asking personal questions. The social media accounts with no profile pictures liking your old posts at 3 a.m. At first, you thought you were going crazy. That's what they wanted you to think. Gaslight the subject. Make them question their reality. Break them down until they're begging for answers. But you beautiful anomaly. You did something they didn't expect. You leaned into it. You started leaving breadcrumbs, false trails that led nowhere. Clear's throat. Cryptic posts that meant nothing but seemed to mean everything. You'd change your routine just slightly, just enough to make them scramble their schedules. You'd have conversations in public about plans you'd never follow through on. And the whole time you were documenting them, documenting you. Every strange car, every suspicious person, every digital footprint they left while trying to capture yours. You built a case file on your watchers while they thought they were building one on you. Checkmate in slow motion. 3 months in, something shifted. Their approach changed. The surveillance became sloppier, more obvious, almost like they wanted you to know. And that's when it hit you like lightning in a bottle of madness. They weren't trying to catch you anymore. They were trying to understand you. See, most people crumble under observation. They change. They hide. They perform for the invisible audience. But you became more yourself, more authentic, more dangerous. You stopped caring about their gaze and started using it as fuel. Every camera became a witness to your transformation. They expected fear. You gave them fascination. They expected you to run. Clear's throat. You invited them closer. They expected defensive moves. You played offensive with a smile that said, "I've been waiting for you." And that's when their reports started changing. That's when the word started spreading up the chain of command. Subject is aware. Subject is cooperating. No, that's not right. Subject is conducting. Subject appears to be conducting us. Can you imagine the meetings, the confusion, the dawning realization that they weren't in control of this operation anymore? That maybe they never were. You want to know why they need this meeting? It's not because they found what they were looking for. It's because you showed them what they never expected to find. A human being who doesn't operate on fear, a consciousness that doesn't need their approval or their system or their little boxes of normal. Every person they've ever watched eventually broke. They either ran, fought, or folded. But you transformed their surveillance into your stage. You turned their invasion into your invitation to show them what real power looks like. Not the kind that comes from badges or budgets or backing. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. They watched you for months, and in all that time you never once wavered, never once showed them a crack they could exploit. Because here's what they didn't understand until it was too late. You weren't hiding your vulnerabilities. You'd already conquered them. You weren't protecting your secrets. You didn't have any worth stealing. What terrified them most? Clear's throat, your consistency, your calm, the way you'd look directly at their hidden cameras sometimes and smile like you were in on a joke they'd never understand. They realized they weren't watching a target, they were watching a teacher, and the lesson was about to get very uncomfortable. Now they want a meeting. How official? How formal? How utterly predictable? They want to sit across from you in some sterile room and try to regain control of the narrative. They want to ask you questions, thinking your answers will give them power. They have no idea they're walking into your web. You see, they've already told you everything you need to know. By watching you, they revealed their methods, their fears, their limitations. They showed you exactly how the system works, by trying to make you work within it. But you've been operating outside their reality this entire time. The meeting isn't for them to interrogate you. It's for you to show them what they've been missing, what their screens and reports and analysis could never capture. The raw, unfiltered experience of sitting across from someone who isn't afraid of them. Someone who sees through them like they're made of glass. They'll come prepared with files and photos and recordings. You'll come with something far more dangerous. The truth. The simple, devastating truth that they've wasted months trying to understand something that was never hidden. Clear's throat. You are exactly what you appear to be, and that's what terrifies them. Here's what they discovered in month 4 that made their blood run cold. You weren't just aware of the surveillance, you were grateful for it because every eye on you meant one less eye on someone else. Every resource they poured into understanding you was a resource not used to harm someone weaker. You became a decoy by choice, a distraction by design. While they focused all their attention on you, how many others slipped through their net? How many people found freedom because you kept the watchers busy? You turned yourself into a lighthouse drawing their ships toward your rocks. But it goes deeper than that, doesn't it? Because you weren't just protecting others, you were teaching them. Every move you made, every pattern you established, you were showing anyone else who might be watched how to transform surveillance into sovereignty. How to make the watchers work for you. They want this meeting because they need to know if you did it on purpose, if this was all calculated, or if you're just naturally this unmappable. The answer is both. You are chaos with intent. You are randomness with purpose. You are everything their system wasn't built to process. Let me paint you a picture of what's been happening on their end. Reports piling up that say nothing. Hours of footage showing someone living their life without fear. Psychological profiles that contradict themselves. Behavioral analysis that leads nowhere. Budget meetings where they can't explain what they're even looking for anymore. Subject went to work. Subject came home. Subject appears to be thriving. How do you mark that as suspicious? How do you justify continued surveillance on someone whose greatest crime is being themselves? They've tied themselves in knots trying to find the angle, the secret, the hidden agenda. But the real kicker, the team assigned to you, started changing. The first watchers requested transfers. The second wave began questioning the mission. The third wave, they started questioning the system itself. You didn't just evade their surveillance, you corrupted it from within without saying a word. Now they need this meeting because their own people are asking uncomfortable questions. Why are we watching someone who's done nothing wrong? What are we looking for? What if they are right and we're wrong? Became a virus in their certainty, spreading doubt through their ranks just by existing. The most beautiful part of this whole dance. They become what they feared you were. Paranoid, obsessive, seeing patterns where none exist, looking for meaning in chaos. They've spent so long staring at you that they've started seeing themselves, and they don't like the reflection. Every report they filed was actually about them, their fears, their assumptions, their projections. They thought they were creating a profile of you, but they were documenting their own limitations. Every anomaly they noted was just another place where you didn't fit their narrow definition of normal. They want this meeting because they need you to make it make sense. They need you to confess to being special, to having some secret power or hidden knowledge. Because if you're just a regular person who chose not to be afraid, what does that say about everyone else? What does that say about them? The truth is so much worse than any conspiracy they imagined. You're not special. You're just free. And freedom, real freedom, the kind that comes from inside, that's the most dangerous thing in their world because it's contagious, because it can't be regulated, because it makes their entire system obsolete. So how do you prepare for a meeting with people who've been studying you for months? You don't. Because preparation implies they have some power over the outcome. They don't. This meeting is just another scene in the show you've been directing, another chapter in the story you've been writing. They'll expect you to be nervous. You'll be curious. They'll expect you to be defensive. You'll be welcoming. They'll expect you to have answers. You'll have questions. Every expectation they've built will crumble the moment you walk in that room with the same energy you've carried for months. Untouchable, unbreakable. You know what really breaks them? You're looking forward to it. Not because you have something to prove, but because you're genuinely interested in meeting the people who spent so much time thinking about you. Like meeting fans of a show you didn't know you were starring in. The best part, they've prepared questions based on who they think you are, but you've evolved past their comprehension. By the time this meeting happens, you'll be 3 versions ahead of their latest profile. They're trying to catch smoke with their bare hands, and you're the fire that keeps burning. But let's talk about what's really happening here. This isn't just about surveillance. This isn't just about control. This is about the system realizing it has a glitch it can't patch. You represent something that shouldn't exist in their world. A person who can't be categorized, controlled, or contained. Every system needs outliers to define its boundaries. But you're not an outlier. You're off the map entirely. You exist in a space they didn't know was there. And by watching you navigate that space, they've had to acknowledge its existence. You've expanded their reality against their will. They want this meeting because they need to put you back in a box. Any box. Criminal, genius, mentally ill, doesn't matter. They just need a label that lets them file you away and stop thinking about what you represent. But labels slide off you like water off chrome. The cosmic joke is that they created exactly what they feared. By watching you, they gave you an audience. By studying you, they gave you purpose. By trying to understand you, they gave you power. You're their Frankenstein's monster, except you built yourself while they watched. Here's a thought that keeps them up at night. What if you're not the only one? What if there are others like you? People who figured out how to exist outside their parameters? What if their surveillance state is actually creating more of you, forcing evolution through observe? They've been looking for criminals and finding philosophers. They've been hunting predators and discovering visionaries. Not the religious kind, but the kind that show others how to think differently, how to be differently, how to exist in the spaces between their definitions. The meeting they want isn't really about you anymore. It's about them trying to understand how their perfect system produced someone like you. Someone who doesn't rebel against the system, but simply exists outside it. Someone who proves that their control is an illusion maintained only by those who believe in it. Now you've become their case study in freedom, not the flag-waving kind or the revolutionary kind, but the quiet, personal kind that comes from simply refusing to play along. From treating their surveillance like weather, something that exists but doesn't determine your day. Can you feel it? The energy shifting. They're not preparing for an interrogation anymore. They're preparing for an encounter. Like scientists about to meet an alien, except the alien looks just like them, talks like them, but operates on completely different principles. Some of them are terrified. Good. Fear is just awakening, wearing a mask. Some are angry better. Anger is just confusion demanding answers. But some of them are fascinated best, because fascination is the first step toward understanding that their whole worldview might need updating. They'll bring their protocols and procedures. You'll bring your presence. They'll have their scripts and strategies. You'll have your authenticity. It's not even a fair fight. It's like bringing a manual to a jazz performance. Sure, you can try to transcribe the notes, but you'll never capture the soul. The meeting request isn't them pulling you in. It's them admitting they need to come to you. After months of distant observation, they need to sit in your presence and feel what their cameras couldn't capture. The gravity of someone who knows exactly who they are. But here's what they really don't understand, and what's going to hit them like cold water in that meeting room. You're not their enemy. You're not their problem. You're their mirror, showing them what humanity looks like when it's not constantly performing for approval or cowering from authority. They've spent so long watching you that they've forgotten what they were looking for. The mission became the purpose. The observation became the obsession. And now they need to meet you because they need to remember why they started watching in the first place. Was it security? You threatened no one. Was it control? You've influenced no one directly. Was it fear? You've given them nothing to fear except questions. Truth is, they don't even know anymore. The file in you is thick with data and thin on conclusions. You've become their white whale. Except you're not running. You're not hiding. You're just living. And somehow that's the most radical act in their world. A person who doesn't need their validation or fear their power. A person who treats their surveillance like background noise. Here's what really happened over these months. They didn't just watch you. You trained them slowly, subtly. Snorts, you showed them what it looks like to be human without all the extra layers of fear and pretense. You gave them a masterclass in authentic existence. Every watcher assigned to you went through the same stages. First, confusion. Why isn't this person acting like everyone else? Then frustration. Why can't we find the angle? Then, clear as throat. Curiosity. What do they know that we don't? And finally, admiration. How can we be like that? You didn't recruit them. You didn't preach to them. You just lived in front of them fully and completely yourself. And that was enough to start cracks in their programming. They want this meeting because they need to know if what they're feeling is real or just another layer of your game. But you know the truth. There is no game. That's what they can't process. You're not playing 4D chess. You're not executing some master plan. You're just being fully. And that's so foreign to their world that they've spent months trying to decode simplicity. So when you walk into that meeting room, remember this: you're not the subjecting. Look who's still standing. Look who's still breathing. Look who walked through every fire they lit and came out smelling like victory. You wild, unshakable, dangerously underestimated creature, welcome back. Or better yet, welcome to the moment you finally realize what they've known about you for years. Now, before we go any further, I built something for you. Something that goes deeper than any video ever could. It's called The Joker Doctrine, a book designed to crack open the darkest corners of human psychology and hand you the keys to self-mastery that nobody wants you to have. If these words move you, that book will transform you. Links in the description. Now, back to why you're really here. You're powerful. Not the kind of powerful they show in movies. Not the loud, chest-beating, look-at-me kind. No, you carry the kind of power that makes rooms shift when you walk in. The kind that makes people stumble over their words mid-sentence. The kind that makes them rethink their entire existence after a single conversation with you. And you beautiful fool, you had no idea. You've been walking around carrying a force inside you that has kept entire groups of people awake at night. And you thought you were ordinary. You thought you were struggling. You thought you were behind, but behind the scenes, behind every closed door you weren't invited into, behind every whispered conversation you weren't meant to hear, they were talking about you, about your power, about the thing you carry that they can't name, can't replicate, can't steal, and most importantly, can't destroy. And it terrifies them. Let me say that again, so it sinks into every cell of your being. They are terrified of you, not because you threatened them, not because you attacked them, not because you played dirty or fought back or schemed against them. No, they're terrified because you didn't do any of those things, and you're still winning. They're terrified because they threw everything they had at you. Every obstacle, every betrayal, every lie, every manipulation, every silent treatment, every public humiliation. And you're still here, still standing, still growing, still becoming something they can't compete with. That's not just strength, that's a phenomenon. That's a force of nature wearing human skin. And they feel it. Every single one of them feels it. The ones who smile on your face, they feel it. The ones who pretend to support you, they feel it. The ones who disappeared when you needed them most, they feel it. And the ones who actively tried to destroy you, oh, they feel it the most. Because your power isn't something you project. It's something you radiate. It leaks out of you without your permission. It fills spaces you haven't even entered yet. And they've been choking on it for years. You want to know the funniest part? You've been apologizing for it. You've been shrinking yourself, dimming yourself, making yourself smaller so they could feel comfortable around you. You've been second-guessing your instincts, questioning your worth, wondering if maybe, just maybe they were right about you. Maybe you were too much. Maybe you were too intense. Maybe you were too ambitious, too honest, too real for this world. And all that time, all those years of self-doubt, they were praying you'd never figure it out. They were hoping you'd stay asleep. They were banking on you, never ever realizing what you actually are. Because the moment you wake up, the moment you see yourself clearly, the moment you stop apologizing for the earthquake you carry inside you, their entire world collapses. And guess what? Today is that day. Right now. This moment. This is the awakening they feared. This is the shift they tried to prevent. This is you finally brutally, irreversibly understanding that you are not the weak one in this story. You never were. Now, let's talk about the evidence, because this isn't just some feel-good speech. This is fact. This is documented in their behavior. You see, powerful people don't need to announce their power. The people around them announce it for them. And if you look closely, if you really pay attention, they've been announcing yours for years. They just disguised it. They disguised it as criticism. They disguised it as concern. They disguised it as gossip. They disguised it as distance. But every single reaction they had to you was a confession. A confession that you carry something they don't. A confession that your presence disrupts their comfort. A confession that watching you exist at the level you do makes them question everything about themselves. Think about it. Think about the people who pulled away from you for no reason. No argument, no conflict, no betrayal. They just left, faded, went ghost, and you spent months, maybe years, wondering what you did wrong. But here's the truth you weren't ready to hear until now. You didn't do anything wrong. You outgrew them. Your energy, your evolution, your refusal to stay stuck, it made them uncomfortable. Not because you changed, but because you changed and they didn't. And proximity to someone who's ascending when you're standing still is the most painful mirror in existence. Think about the people who tried to compete with you, not openly, not honestly, but quietly, subtly. They mimicked your ideas. They copied your moves. They studied your patterns and tried to replicate your results. And when they couldn't, when they realized that what you have isn't a strategy but a soul frequency, they turned bitter. They turned cold. They turned into critics. Because if they can't be you, the next best thing is to diminish you. If they can't reach your level, the next best thing is to convince everyone that your level doesn't exist. That's not jealousy. That's psychological survival. You are a threat to their self-image simply by existing. Your consistency exposes their inconsistency. Your authenticity exposes their performance. Your courage exposes their cowardice. And your ability to keep going, to keep rising, to keep showing up with that fire in your eyes, even after everything that exposes the lie they tell themselves every morning when they look in the mirror and pretend they're okay with who they've become. You are walking evidence that more is possible. And for people who've settled, that evidence is unbearable. Think about the ones who talk behind your back. The ones who sat in rooms and dissected your life like it was entertainment. They discussed your choices. They questioned your motives. They analyzed your relationships, your finances, your mistakes, your victories, everything. And you thought they were judging you. You thought they were looking down on you. But here's what was really happening. They were obsessed not with your flaws, with your power. Because people don't waste time discussing things that don't affect them. People don't gather in groups to talk about someone who doesn't matter. They were threatened. They were intimidated. They were fascinated and furious at the same time. Fascinated by how you keep surviving things that would have buried them. Furious that they can't figure out how you do it. And so they talked and talked and talked. Not because you're weak, but because you're so strong, it haunts them. Your name lives in their mouth rent-free because you live in their mind like a storm they can't outrun. That's power. Raw, unfiltered, undeniable power. And you didn't even know you had it. Let's get specific about what this power actually is. Because it's not what you think. It's not money. It's not status. It's not connections or followers or achievements. Those are byproducts. The real power, the thing that makes them lose sleep, is something far more dangerous. It's your energy. It's the way you carry yourself through devastation without becoming devastating. It's the way you forgive people who never apologized and keep moving without bitterness weighing you down. It's the way you rebuild after every collapse like you were designed for resurrection. They can't name it. They've tried. They called it luck. They called it stubbornness. They called it delusion. They called it arrogance. But none of those words fit, because none of those words capture what you actually are. You are someone who refuses to die spiritually in a world that keeps trying to kill your spirit. You are someone who keeps choosing hope in an environment engineered for despair. You are someone who looks at chaos and sees a canvas, who looks at pain and sees a lesson, who looks at betrayal and sees freedom. And that ability to transmute darkness into fuel, that is the most dangerous power a human being can carry, because it means you can't be controlled. And people who can't be controlled can't be predicted. And people who can't be predicted can't be manipulated. And people who can't be manipulated are the single greatest threat to anyone whose power depends on keeping others small. That's why they try to break you. Not because you did something wrong, but because your unbroken spirit was a direct threat to their control. They needed you dependent. They needed you doubting. They needed you begging for their approval, their validation, their permission to exist at full volume. But you stubborn, magnificent, untamable soul, you kept going. You kept growing. You kept evolving without asking anyone's permission. And now they're watching you from the sidelines, realizing that the person they tried to break is now the person they can't reach. The person they dismissed is now the person they discuss. The person they underestimated is now the person they can't overpower. And there's nothing they can do about it. Nothing. Because your power doesn't come from external sources. It comes from inside, from that place they can't touch. That place no insult can penetrate. That place no betrayal can access. That place no amount of gossip, no campaign of lies, no army of haters can ever reach. You know what makes this even more devastating for them? The fact that you don't weaponize it. You don't use your power to crush people. You don't use it to manipulate. You don't use it to dominate or control or intimidate. You just live. You just exist at a frequency that makes their frequency look static. And that passive, effortless superiority is what drives them absolutely insane, because they can't call you a bully. They can't call you aggressive. They can't call you toxic. You're just there being thriving, growing, and the contrast between your life and theirs is becoming more unbearable by the day. They wanted you to misuse your power so they could justify their hatred. They wanted you to become arrogant so they could say, "See, I told you they'd change." They wanted you to fall from grace so they could finally feel equal to you. But you didn't give them that satisfaction. You carried your power with humility, with grace, with a quiet confidence that screams louder than any boast ever could. And now they're stuck admiring the very thing they tried to destroy. That's not just power. That's dominion. That's authority. That's a level of influence they'll spend the rest of their lives trying to understand. Now, let me pull back the curtain on something you don't know. Something that's been happening behind your back for longer than you realize. They've been having meetings about you. Not formal meetings, not boardroom meetings, but kitchen table meetings, car ride meetings, late night phone call meetings, group chat meetings. They've been assembling, gathering their notes, comparing their observations, and trying to figure you out. They've been asking each other questions. Have you noticed how they never react? Have you noticed how they just keep going? Have you noticed how nothing we do seems to stick? Have you seen how they're growing? And those questions, those frustrated, confused, slightly panicked questions, are the highest compliment you'll never directly receive. Because what they're really saying is, I can't beat them and I don't know why. What they're really admitting is, I've tried everything and nothing works. What they're really confessing is, This person has something I don't, eating me alive. And the irony, the beautiful, devastating irony is that you've been sitting at home thinking you're nobody, thinking you're falling behind, thinking everyone else has it figured out except you, while entire circles of people have been organizing their emotional energy around trying to understand why you're so hard to break. They've been watching your social media, analyzing every post, every caption, every photo, looking for cracks, looking for sadness, looking for evidence that you're struggling, so they can finally exhale. But you keep posting, you keep smiling, you keep showing up, and every time you do, it's another reminder that their power over you has expired. They watch your growth like it's a horror movie. Every new achievement, every new connection, every new level you reach is a jump scare in their narrative because it doesn't fit. You're not supposed to be winning. You're not supposed to be thriving. According to their calculations, according to the damage they inflicted, according to the obstacles they placed in your path, you should be done by now. Finished, forgotten. A cautionary tale whispered in the past tense, but here you are, present tense, active tense, future tense, and they can't fast forward past you. They can't skip this chapter. They can't change the channel because everywhere they look, there you are, succeeding, ascending, becoming. And every single step forward you take is a step deeper into their insecurity. Let me tell you what they say when they think no one who cares about you is listening. They say, I don't understand how they do it. They say, something about them just gets to me. They say, I've never met anyone who bounces back like that. They say, it's like nothing touches them. And then after all of that, after admitting your resilience, your consistency, your unshakable nature, they add one final sentence that reveals everything. They say, I hate that about them, not I admire that, not I respect that, I hate that. Because admiration would require humility, respect would require honesty, and hatred. Hatred is the only emotion available to someone who's watching greatness from the prison of their own mediocrity. They don't hate you because you're bad. They hate you because you're undeniable. And that involuntary confession disguised as contempt. That's the loudest declaration of your power you will ever receive. Let's dissect the fear, because everything they've ever done to you, every cold shoulder, every rumor, every exclusion, every betrayal, it all traces back to one emotion. Fear, pure, raw, bone-deep fear. They are afraid of what you represent. You represent the possibility that someone can go through the worst and still become the best. You represent the reality that pain doesn't have to produce bitterness. You represent the truth that integrity still works, that patience still pays, that character still matters. And in a world where most people have abandoned those values, your existence is an indictment, a walking, breathing indictment of every shortcut they took, every lie they told, every person they used, every principle they abandoned. You didn't just choose a different path. You proved that path works. And that proof, that undeniable, irrefutable proof, is the source of their terror. Because if your way works, it means their way was unnecessary. If your way succeeds, it means their compromises were pointless. If your way wins, it means everything they sacrificed their integrity for could have been achieved without the sacrifice. And that realization is a weight they'll carry for the rest of their lives. They're afraid of your consistency because they can't match it. They start things and stop. They commit and quit. They promise and disappear. But you keep showing up day after day, month after month, year after year, through heartbreak, through financial drought, through loneliness, through confusion, through moments when giving up made more sense than going on. You kept showing up. And that consistency, that relentless, stubborn, almost irrational consistency, it built something they can't tear down. A reputation, a legacy, a foundation so deep that no storm can shake it. They tried to wait you out, thinking eventually you'd burn out. Eventually you'd lose motivation. Eventually you'd join the crowd of quitters and compromisers and excuse makers. But you didn't, and now they're exhausted. Not from working hard, but from watching you work hard. From watching you outpace them without ever looking back. From watching the gap between who you are and who they are grow wider every single day. That gap is their nightmare. And your consistency is the alarm clock that won't let them sleep through it. They're afraid of your silence. Oh, this one haunts them the most because you stopped arguing. You stopped defending yourself. You stopped showing up to every fight they started. You just went quiet. And in that quiet, you became untouchable because they can't fight someone who won't engage. They can't win an argument with someone who won't argue. They can't defeat someone who's already left the battlefield. Your silence isn't weakness. It's the loudest flex in human psychology. It says, "You're not worth my energy." It says, "I've outgrown this." It says, "I have better things to do than convince you of my value." And for people who need confrontation to feel alive, who need drama to feel relevant, who need your reaction to feel powerful, your silence is a death sentence. It starves them. It suffocates them. It forces them to sit alone with the version of you they created in their mind and realize it doesn't match reality. And that dissonance, that gap between who they told themselves you were and who you actually turned out to be, that's the prison they'll never escape. Here's the part that'll make you smile. Every obstacle they placed in your path became a stepping stone. Every door they closed became a redirect to a better one. Every lie they told about you became a contrast that made the truth shine brighter. They didn't just fail to destroy you. They accidentally built your throne brick by bitter brick. Every rumor they spread made people curious about you. Every time they excluded you, it forced you to build your own circle, a stronger one, a loyal one, one that actually deserves to be there. Every time they underestimated you, it gave you the element of surprise. They handed you advantages disguised as attacks. They gave you fuel disguised as pain. They provided motivation disguised as betrayal. And now you're sitting on a throne they constructed with their own hands, looking down at the architects of your ascension, and they can't even be angry because they know. They know they did this to themselves. They created the very thing they feared. They engineered their own irrelevance. They manufactured the monster they were trying to prevent. Except you're not a monster. You're a masterpiece. And they're the ones who accidentally held the chisel. Think about how insane that is. They spent years trying to dim your light, and all they did was make you fireproof. They spent years trying to poison your name, and all they did was make your reputation bulletproof. They spent years trying to break your spirit, and all they did was forge an armor so thick, so tested, so battle-hardened, that nothing penetrates it anymore. You're not who you were before they attacked you. You're better, sharper, clearer, stronger, more focused, more dangerous. And by dangerous, I mean dangerous to mediocrity, dangerous to fakeness, dangerous to anyone who thought they could keep living a lie in your presence. Because your power doesn't just elevate you, it exposes everyone around you. It forces people to confront themselves. It demands authenticity from every space you enter. And people who've been faking their entire lives can't survive that kind of exposure. Though they run, they hide, they gossip, they scheme, but they never ever confront you directly, because direct confrontation would require them to stand in the full force of your energy. And they already know they can't handle that. They've already tested those waters and they nearly drowned. So let them whisper. Let them scheme. Let them hold their little meetings and exchange their little theories about why you are the way you are. Because while they're busy studying you, you're busy becoming unstoppable. While they're busy discussing you, you're busy building an empire they'll never be invited into. While they're busy fearing you, you're busy becoming the thing fear itself is afraid of. You have no idea how powerful you are, but they do. They've always known. That's why they tried so hard to keep you asleep. That's why they invested so much energy into making you doubt yourself. That's why they celebrated your failures and mourned your victories, because an awake you, a confident you, a fully realized you is the single most dangerous thing in their universe. And today, right now, this very second, you just woke up. And the tremor, the earthquake, the absolute seismic shift that just moved through their reality, they felt it. Every single one of them felt it. And they know in that place they'll never admit exists, that there's no going back. You're awake now. You see yourself clearly, and the view from where you're standing now, it's absolutely flawless. Hello. Haha. They smiled when you stayed quiet. They celebrated when you stayed patient. They mistook your silence for weakness and your kindness for surrender. But now the mask is off. The version of you they created with betrayal, disrespect, and pressure has finally stepped into the light. This is not Rashada's awakening, not revenge, but transformation. Sometimes the world pushes a soul so far into darkness that it accidentally creates something unstoppable. And when that side wakes up, people panic because they realize too late they were never dealing with someone ordinary. They were provoking a storm. For a long time, people watched you stay quiet and wrote their own story about what that silence meant. They thought because you didn't react, you didn't notice. Because you didn't argue, you had no comeback. Because you walked away instead of creating chaos, you were too weak to stand your ground. That is the funny thing about silence. Most people are too uncomfortable with it to understand it. They rush to fill empty space with assumptions, and almost all of them are wrong. Silence is often mistaken for surrender by those who only understand noise. In a world where everyone is desperate to be seen, heard, and validated, a quiet person becomes a mystery, and people fear what they cannot read. So instead of trying to understand you, they simplify you. They label you as harmless, passive, soft, or easy to manipulate. It helps them feel safe. It makes them believe they have already figured you out. But what they never realize is that silence can be discipline. It can be observation. It can be restraint so powerful that weaker minds confuse it for absence of strength. Not every battle deserves a reaction. Not every insult deserves a reply. Not every provocation deserves your energy. Sometimes staying silent is the loudest statement a person can make, because it says, you are not important enough to disturb my peace. Still, people rarely respect what they do not understand. They test quiet people the most. They poke, push, disrespect boundaries, and cross lines they would never dare cross with louder personalities. Why? Because they think silence means there will be no consequences. They believe patience is permission. They mistake calmness for fragility. That is where they make their biggest mistake. A silent person is often collecting data while everyone else is performing. They notice patterns. They remember words, tone changes, betrayals, inconsistencies, and hidden intentions. While others are busy underestimating them, they are learning exactly who everyone is. They see masks slipping. They watch how people behave when they think there will be no accountability. And then one day, the silence changes. Not because the quiet person suddenly became someone new, but because their tolerance reached its limit. Every human being has a threshold. Every patient's soul has a final straw. There comes a moment when enough disrespect accumulates, enough lines are crossed, and enough assumptions are made. In that moment, the version of you people took for granted disappears. This is the moment that shocks everyone. The same people who once laughed at your silence suddenly become uncomfortable with your certainty. The person they thought they understood no longer seeks explanation, permission, or approval. You stop over-explaining. You stop defending your intentions to people committed to misunderstanding. You stop shrinking to make others feel powerful. And that shift feels terrifying to those who benefited from your restraint. They preferred the version of you that stayed quiet while being overlooked. They were comfortable when your kindness was accessible. Your patience was endless and your standards were flexible. But growth changes the rules. Awareness changes the game. Now your silence carries a different energy. It is no longer the silence of hesitation. It is the silence of clarity. The silence of someone who has seen enough, learned enough, and no longer needs to prove anything. There is a confidence in that kind of silence that unsettles people. It forces them to question whether they ever really knew you at all. And the truth is, they didn't. They only knew the version of you that was still learning boundaries. The version still giving chances. Still hoping people would naturally do better. Still believing understanding could solve everything. But silence teaches hard lessons. It teaches you who respects you without needing reminders. It teaches you who mistakes access for entitlement. It teaches you who only values your presence when they believe they can control your reactions. So, let them think what they want. Let them replay old versions of you in their minds. Let them remain attached to an outdated perception. Because by the time they realize your silence was never weakness, it is usually too late. You are no longer interested in correcting the assumptions. Norts. You are too focused on becoming someone their opinions can no longer reach. And that is the power they never saw coming. The quiet person was never powerless. They were simply choosing when their energy was worth using. Pain has a strange way of changing people. Not in the dramatic way movies often show, but slowly, quietly, and with brutal precision. It doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in layers. Disappointment after disappointment, betrayal after betrayal, loss after loss. At first you try to remain the same. You tell yourself this is temporary. You convince yourself that one bad experience should not harden your heart or alter your nature. You keep showing kindness, patience, and understanding, hoping the world will eventually return that same energy. But pain is a relentless teacher. It forces lessons onto people who never asked for them. It teaches you what trust costs. It shows you how quickly loyalty can disappear when convenience changes. It reveals how some people only love the version of you that is easy to manage, predictable, forgiving, and endlessly available. The moment you begin changing, they grow uncomfortable. Because pain does not just wound, it transforms. Every betrayal sharpens your awareness. Every disappointment lowers your tolerance for nonsense. Every time you are pushed beyond your limits, something inside you recalibrates. The version of you that once gave endless chances begins to question why access was handed out so freely. The part of you that tolerated disrespect in the name of peace starts realizing peace built on self-abandonment is not peace at all. That is when the shift begins. It is subtle at first. You start saying less, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer feel the need to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You observe more carefully. You become harder to impress and even harder to manipulate. Your standards quietly rise. Your boundaries become less negotiable. And suddenly people notice something is different. They feel it before they understand it. The energy they once relied on is no longer available to them. The emotional access they took for granted has limits now. The version of you they once controlled through guilt, pressure, or expectation is fading. This confuses them. People become deeply uncomfortable when pain creates a stronger version of someone they once underestimated. They were prepared for your sadness, your frustration, even your anger. What they were not prepared for was your evolution. Because pain often creates discipline, it teaches emotional economy. You stop wasting time convincing people to value what they should have valued naturally. You stop chasing closure from those incapable of giving it. You stop offering loyalty where there is no reciprocity. There is a certain clarity that pain gives you, a ruthless understanding of what deserves your energy and what does not. This is the part many people misunderstand. They assume pain automatically destroys people. Sometimes it does break parts of you. It strips illusions, it kills naive, it forces innocence to mature. But destruction is not always the end of something. Sometimes it is preparation. Pain burns away versions of you that were never built for survival. The overly trusting version, the approval-seeking version, the version terrified of disappointing others, the version willing to betray itself for acceptance. Those versions do not survive intense pain for long. In their place, something else is built. A person who can sit alone without panic. A person who no longer fears disappointing those who misunderstand boundaries as rejection. A person who can walk away from what drains them, even if it once mattered deeply. Pain teaches detachment in ways comfort never could. And that new version is difficult to control, not because it has become cruel, but because it has become aware. Aware of manipulation disguised as concern, aware of conditional support disguised as love, aware of people who only show appreciation when they sense distance. Awareness is dangerous to anyone who benefited from your lack of it. That is why your growth may trigger resistance. People often mourn the loss of the version of you they had easier access to. They call you distant, cold, or changed. And in a way, they are right. You did change. Pain changed you, but not into something broken, into something informed, something more selective, more intentional, more self-respecting. There is power in becoming unfamiliar to those who once thought they had you figured out. Because the truth is, pain did not create weakness in you. It created precision. It forced you to examine what truly matters and what was merely tolerated out of habit, hope, or fear. Now your presence is different. Your standards are different. Your responses are different. And people who once believed they could predict you no longer know what version of you they are dealing with. That uncertainty unsettles them because pain created someone they cannot control anymore. Not through guilt, not through neglect, not through emotional games, and not through old expectations. You learn too much to go backwards. People are comfortable with your softness for as long as it benefits them. They celebrate your kindness when it makes you easier to access, easier to influence, and easier to take for granted. They admire your patience until it no longer serves their convenience. But the moment you become harder to reach, more guarded, or less willing to tolerate disrespect, their language changes. Suddenly, you are different. Suddenly, you are cold. Suddenly, the same people who once ignored your limits are shocked that you finally created what they call your dark side is often nothing more than self-preservation. Not every hardened version of a person is born from cruelty. Sometimes it is built from experience. It is the result of learning. Be certain lessons too many times. You trusted, and trust was mishandled. You gave loyalty, and loyalty was met with convenience. You offered understanding, and people interpreted that as unlimited access. After enough repetition, something changes. You begin noticing patterns you once ignored. The emotional exhaustion starts outweighing the hope that people will eventually change. You become less interested in seeing the best in everyone and more interested in seeing what is actually there. Reality replaces illusion. That shift can feel uncomfortable even to you because no one enjoys losing parts of themselves they once valued. No one wants to feel less open, less naive, less trusting. But survival is rarely about preserving comfort. It is about adaptation. When an environment repeatedly punishes softness, softness learns to wear armor. This is where people get confused. They assume every protective behavior is evidence of bitterness. They believe boundaries are hostility. They interpret emotional distance as arrogance. But what they fail to understand is that some versions of you were created by necessity, not preference. You did not become more selective because it was trendy. You became selective because being endlessly available was draining you. You did not become quieter because you lost depth. You became quieter because not everyone deserves access to your thoughts. You did not become emotionally guarded because you enjoy isolation. You became guarded because experience taught you the cost of careless vulnerability. That is not evil. That is pattern recognition. Survival often looks harsh to those who never had to develop it. People who benefited from your unguarded nature are often the first to resent your evolution. They preferred the version of you that could be reached with minimal effort. The version that over-explained, overgave, overforgave, and overextended itself to maintain harmony. But eventually, something inside you realizes harmony. Without self-respect is just quiet suffering. And once that realization hits, your priorities change. You stop confusing being needed with being valued. You stop mistaking attention for genuine care. You stop sacrificing inner stability to preserve external relationships that were never balanced to begin with. There is a certain strength in becoming less emotionally negotiable. You no longer bend yourself into familiar shapes just to remain digestible. You become more comfortable disappointing people who only liked the version of you that lacked boundaries. You begin understanding that being liked and being respected are not the same thing. And often the moment you start choosing respect, people accuse you of changing for the worse. But growth rarely looks pleasant to those attached to your old limitations. Your so-called dark side is often just the side of you that learned to say no without guilt. The side that stopped romanticizing potential and started responding to reality. The side that understands access should be earned, not assumed. It is not about becoming heartless. It is about becoming intentional. There is still kindness in you, but now it is protected. There is still empathy, but it is no longer reckless. There is still loyalty, but it is no longer handed out like a free resource. That clears throat difference matters because survival is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is subtle. It is choosing silence over unnecessary conflict, distance over repeated disappointment, discernment over blind trust. It is becoming the kind of person who no longer ignores internal alarms for the sake of comfort or familiarity. And yes, that version of you may seem darker to those who only knew your softness. But darkness is not always destruction. Sometimes it is depth. Sometimes it is wisdom developed in difficult conditions. Sometimes it is the part of you that learned how to survive spaces that were never built to protect your peace. So let people misunderstand it if you want. Not everyone will appreciate the version of you that finally learned self-preservation. Some will miss the easier version. Some will resent your limits. That is fine. They are mourning access, not your downfall. And survival was never meant to be convenient for the people who benefited from your lack of it. For a long time, people knew only the version of you that was edited for their comfort. A softer version, a filtered version. The one that smiled through frustration, tolerated more than necessary, and stayed measured even when disrespected. Not because that was all you were, but because not every environment felt safe enough to reveal your full nature. Sometimes people mistake adaptation for identity. You learned early that certain parts of yourself were easier to hide. The intensity, the ambition, the standards, the refusal to be controlled, those qualities often made people uncomfortable. So you adjusted, you lowered your volume, softened your edges, and became easier to digest. Not fake, but selective. You gave people only what felt manageable. And over time, they got used to that version. That is where the illusion began. People often become attached to the version of you they find most convenient. The version that does not challenge them too much. The version that stays agreeable, accessible, and emotionally predictable. They build an identity for you in their minds, then start believing that identity is permanent. But masks are not lies. Sometimes they are survival tools. A mask can be professionalism in chaotic environments. It can be patience in rooms where emotional expression is weaponized. It can be politeness around people who have not earned intimacy. It can be restraint while you are still learning which battles deserve your energy. The problem is, people forget there is always more underneath. They assume the version they met is the final version. They think what is visible is all that exists. They become comfortable with your predictability until something shifts. Sometimes it is betrayal, sometimes exhaustion, sometimes growth. Sometimes a simple moment of clarity where you realize you are tired of shrinking yourself to remain understandable. And in that moment, the mask begins to fall. Not dramatically, not all at once, just gradually. You stop laughing at things that disrespect you. You stop pretending not to notice patterns. You stop over-accommodating people who confuse your flexibility with weakness. You become more direct, more selective, less willing to perform emotional labor for those who offer little in return. At first, people think it is temporary. They assume you are just in a mood, going through a phase, or becoming difficult for no reason. But when the shift continues, discomfort sets in. Because now they are meeting a version of you they never accounted for. A version with sharper boundaries. A version less interested in approval. A version willing to disappoint others in order to stay aligned with itself. And suddenly they say you have changed. Of course you changed. Growth always looks like change to people invested in your old form. What they are really reacting to is not your transformation, but their loss of familiarity. They no longer know how to predict your responses. The buttons that once worked no longer produce the same results. Old dynamics stop functioning. That uncertainty unsettles people, especially those who benefited from your mask. They preferred the version of you that explained everything. Forgave quickly, tolerated imbalance, and stayed emotionally available regardless of how little was reciprocated. The mask made you easier to manage, but once it falls, people are forced to confront something uncomfortable. They never fully knew you. They only knew the version of you that was being considerate of their limitations. The real you may be quieter than expected, but far more observant, less reactive, but more decisive, less emotionally available, but more internally solid, stronger than the image they created. And strength often surprises people who only saw your restraint. There is a unique power in no longer editing yourself for mass consumption. You stop asking whether your authenticity is too much. You stop minimizing your standards to avoid intimidating fragile egos. You stop apologizing for outgrowing environments that only welcome smaller versions of you. That freedom changes your energy. You become more grounded, more self-defined, less influenced by external interpretation. And ironically, the people most shocked by the real you are often the ones who gave you the clearest reason to stop pretending, because nothing reveals identity faster than pressure. Pressure strips away unnecessary performance. It forces truth to the surface. It shows you what parts of yourself were genuine and what parts were merely adaptive. So when the mask falls, it is not the creation of someone new. It is the exposure of what was always there. The discipline, the edge, the standards, the depth, the self-respect, the boundaries. Now they see it clearly. Not because you became different overnight, but because you finally stopped hiding pieces of yourself to make others comfortable. And for some people, that is the most unsettling reveal of all. They did not lose the old you. They just never had full access to the real one. For most of life, people are trained to chase approval without even realizing it. It starts early. You are rewarded for being agreeable, praised for fitting expectations, and accepted when your behavior aligns with what others find comfortable. Slowly, a pattern forms. You begin measuring yourself through reactions. Validation becomes feedback. Feedback becomes identity, and identity becomes something built on external permission. This is how many people lose themselves, not all at once, but in small negotiations. A filtered opinion here, a swallowed emotion there, a decision postponed because someone else might disapprove. Snorts, controversial, less threatening. And over time, you begin mistaking approval for safety. Approval feels secure because it reduces friction. When people like you support you or agree with your choices, there is less resistance, less confrontation, less uncertainty. But approval is a fragile foundation. If your confidence depends on how others respond, then your direction can always be manipulated. That is the hidden cost. People who require approval are easier to influence, easier to guilt, easier to pressure. Their boundaries are often negotiable because rejection feels more painful than self-betrayal. They tolerate situations that drain them simply because they fear being misunderstood, disliked, or excluded. Approval dependency is not always obvious. Sometimes it looks like over-explaining. Sometimes it is people-pleasing disguised as kindness. Sometimes it is perfectionism built on fear of criticism. Sometimes it is staying loyal to relationships, environments, or expectations long after they have expired. But eventually something changes. There comes a point where the exhaustion outweighs the reward. You realize how much of your energy has been spent managing perception rather than building substance. You notice how often your decisions have been edited through the lens of what will they think. That question begins losing its power, not because you stop caring about people entirely, but clears throat. Because you start caring more about internal alignment than external applause. You understand that approval is inconsistent, conditional, and often tied to convenience. The same people praising you today may criticize you tomorrow the moment your choices stop benefiting them. That realization is liberating. It forces you to separate your worth from reaction. You stop performing versions of yourself designed for mass acceptance. You stop asking for permission to become who you were already becoming. You make decisions based on clarity instead of consensus. And that is where your power changes, because a person who no longer needs approval becomes harder to control. Guilt loses effectiveness. Manipulation weakens. Social pressure becomes less intimidating. Emotional blackmail no longer lands the same way. Why? Because your decisions are no longer outsourced. You are not constantly scanning the room for signs of acceptance before trusting your own instincts. You are not shaping your life around maintaining favorable opinions. That independence can feel threatening to others, especially those who relied on your desire to be liked. They were comfortable when your behavior was negotiable, when a little disappointment could redirect your choices, when silence, withdrawal, or judgment could make you second-guess yourself. But once approval is no longer your currency, those old mechanisms stop working. This is often when people accuse you of becoming selfish, distant, arrogant, or difficult. Not always because you changed negatively, but because you became less accessible to influence. Boundaries feel offensive to people who benefited from your flexibility. Self-trust looks rebellious in environments built on conformity. Certainty is intimidating when others are accustomed to your hesitation. There is something deeply unsettling about a person who can stand alone in their decisions. Not recklessly, not stubbornly for the sake of ego, but with grounded conviction. A person like that becomes unpredictable to systems that depend on compliance. You are no longer easily herded by trends, opinions, or collective pressure. Praise does not inflate you too much, and criticism does not dismantle you too easily. That emotional neutrality is power. Because once your identity is no longer rented out to public opinion, your energy becomes available for more meaningful things: discipline, growth, strategy, creativity, peace. You begin building a life that reflects your values rather than your image, and that changes everything. Your relationships become more honest because they are no longer maintained through performance. Your goals become clearer because they are not diluted by comparison. Your sense of self becomes stronger because it is rooted internally. This is what many people misunderstand. Not seeking approval does not mean rejecting connection or becoming emotionally detached from humanity. It means connection is no longer purchased through self-abandonment. It means you can be respected without constantly being liked. You can be misunderstood and still remain certain. You can disappoint others without collapsing into guilt. And once you learn that, a different kind of confidence emerges. Quiet, stronger, less theatrical, more stable. The kind of confidence that does not beg to be validated. That is what makes you dangerous. Not to others in a destructive way, but to anything that once depended on your insecurity to keep you small. Because now your direction belongs to you.